Okay, continuing on with the so-called sprint after lesson one. This is grade 7, module 4, lesson 1. In the first part of this video series, we looked at these problems up here where you have a fraction and they want to know what the percent is. Now let's move a little bit further down and let's talk about moving from a percent to a decimal or from a percent to a fraction. Okay, so let's look at the first one. The first one we have is 75%. Now, we learned in part 1 that whenever you see the percent symbol, that is the same as dividing by 100. So there is your fraction, but they are asking for a decimal. So how do we move from a fraction to a decimal? Well, the one way to do it that always works is to go ahead and do long division. So in this case, we would put 75 in the box. We would add a decimal point, several zeros, and we would put our decimal point on top. 100 does not go into 7. It does not go into 75, but it does go into 750 7 times. We multiply, we get 50. We bring down a 0, and 5 times 100 is 500. So our answer is 0.75. So in order to go from percent to the decimal, one way to do it is to do it in steps. You create a fraction, which you can always do with a percent sign. You can always take this percent sign and replace it with division by 100. Then, when you're in this fraction scenario, you use long division to get your decimal. Okay, that is one way to do it. Now, let's explore another way to do it. Okay, you start with 75%, and you again convert it 75 to 100. Now, you are dividing by 100 here. Therefore, when you are dividing, this number up top is going to get smaller. Whenever you multiply by 100, you get bigger. So if we had 75 times 100, you would become 7,500. So the 75 got bigger, went from 75 to 7,500. Here, the exact opposite is going to happen. Since we're dividing by 100, we know that that 75 is going to get smaller. Well, how much smaller? Here's the answer. This 75 has a decimal point right there. We leave it out, but that's where it is. If you're dividing by 100, this is going to get smaller by 2 decimal places. So you're going to move this to the left twice, and your final value is going to be 0.75, which is the same value we got from long division. Let's do another one. Let's do 25% as a decimal. Remember, you can replace that percentage sign with a division by 100. These two statements are the same. We're dividing by 100. We're starting off with the decimal point right there with the 25. Since we're dividing, we're going to get smaller. So this 25 with the decimal point here is going to get smaller. We're going to move this to the left 2 places, and our final is going to be 0.25. So 25% as a decimal is 0.25. And we got there via conversion to a fraction, recognizing we're dividing by 100, and whenever you divide, divide by 100, the numbers get smaller. Okay, so far we have done 75% and 25%. And what did we notice? We noticed that 75% became 0.75. And the 25% became 0.25. So after you do enough of these, you realize that if you want, you can go directly from the percent sign to the decimal without having to stop and do the fraction by dividing by 100. So what you do is you take this 75, you know it has a decimal point there. If you have a percent sign, you take away the percent and you move twice to the left, and that becomes 0.75. You can do that if you're comfortable. If not, don't hesitate to do it this way, because here it's very clear what we did. We changed the 25% into 25 divided by 100. We know when you divide by 100 you get smaller. Therefore, we move the decimal place to the left twice and get 0.25. Okay, let's do this one, 5% as a decimal. Okay, we're going to do it the long way. 5%. What does 5% mean? 5% means 5 divided by 100. We're dividing, so we know that this 5 is going to get smaller. How much smaller? Well, the decimal point on a 5 is right there. We don't always write it, but we know it's there. So here, we're going to be moving this decimal place to the left twice. Whenever I'm in a situation and I'm moving to the left and there's nothing but space there, I go ahead and I put zeros in there. And the reason is, I want a place to move to. I don't want to just move into space without knowing exactly where to go. So here's our initial decimal place. We go 1, 2, it goes right there. So my answer is 0.05. So 5%, we switch to a fraction first. That reminds us that we're dividing by 100. When we divide by 100, we move the decimal place 2 spaces to the left. Okay, now let's look at a couple of these other ones. How about this? How about 92% as a fraction? This is a piece of cake. 92% as a fraction. Okay, well, since it's 92%, we know that that's the same as 92 over 100. So there's our fraction. We're done. Now, they may want us to simplify that. So I'll show you how I like to simplify it. I like to break things down like so. 92 can be divided by 2, and you have 2 times 46. 100 can be divided by 2, and you get 2 times 50. Let's do that again. 2 times 23, 2 times 25. Cross out the 2's here. I forgot to mention we cross out the 2's. So here's our final reduced fraction is 23 over 25. So you start out by dividing by 100. That's what 92% means. You take away the percent sign and you replace it with division by 100. And then you proceed and you simplify the fraction. Okay, let's do one more, 44% as a fraction. 44% as a fraction. As soon as we see that percent sign, we can divide by 100 and take away the percent sign. So there it is. We went from percent to a fraction. Now theoretically we're done. However, most teachers like us to break this down or reduce it. Now we could go by 2, or we could say to ourselves, I'm going to break 44 down into 4 times 11. This will be a little bit more expeditious, a little bit quicker. And we can divide 100 as 4 times 25. Now we can cross out these 4's, and our final answer is going to be 11 over 25.